Look into the darkness. Find the blazing star and let it become the eclipse. Don't fear purification of the soul. When the soul resurrects,
welcome to the Occult Rejects. This episode, I got three of the other Occult Rejects with me today joining me. I'm very happy to be able to get these guys on together, and especially on Christmas, and to be able to do a live for you all. That's what's up. I appreciate you guys making this happen. First off, we got the Headless Giant. We already know who he is. Headless, real quick, unmute yourself and let everybody know where they can find your amazing work, please.
Well, you can find me on Twitter. I've been doing a lot of lives recently. You can look at my big old Christmas Eve spectacular last night. We covered a lot of different territory in a lot of different ways, talking about anxiety. You know, what is it? Is it anticipation? What is this? And it's a very good night for it. Christmas Eve, anxiety and anticipation. It's right there. So you guys can check that out. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Go check out his links down at the bottom. Go check out his YouTube and hit that subscribe button. Ethan, my man, actually, we'll get to you last because you brought us the topic. Jin the Ninja. What up, Jin? Thank you very much for coming on again. I always appreciate you coming on and giving your insight on things. Please let everybody know where they can find your amazing work as well.
Sure. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Headless. And thank you, Ethan, for, I guess we're going to dive into this convo. But so I have a show, Threshold Saints, Spotify and Apple just dropped an episode with Todd, the Magi, and it's all about Liber Chaos. And then we'll have an episode with Sachki, one of my most requested reappearing guests. So he worked for CERN, and he also practiced Kabbalah from the Lurianic perspective. So we had quite a far-ranging conversation about that. And then Nick is obviously coming up really soon here, so we're really excited for that conversation. And then also I have done a 9-part series or 9-part live stream on the Aeon of the Daughter, which culminated in the live reading of Liber 49, at least the Babylon Invocation and the Message, as well as 2 Gnostic texts with the Epinoia of Nuria and Thunder Perfect Mind. So I think it was pretty cool. A lot of people have said it was kind of fucking cool that I did it. So yeah, props to me. Thanks, Nick, and thanks, guys.
Of course. No, thank you. And his links are in the bottom as well to go check out his stuff. And finally, to Ethan. Ethan, thank you very much for even bringing this topic. That's what's up. I find it very interesting and definitely wanted to make it happen. Let everybody know, in case we got new listeners who don't know who you are yet. Let everybody know what your deal is and where they can find your work.
Well, thank you guys for all making this happen. I'm always honored to speak with you guys and hear your ideas. I am a author, philosopher. I practice and teach some Tai Chi too, and I also made an attempt to write nonfiction humor through this book that I wrote, The Santa Claus Syndrome, a holiday hazing Santa Claus syndrome. So yeah, I've written a few books that are more serious and more deep, but I thought we could get into a little of the deep stuff and the humorous stuff and even the magical and psychological about the holiday. So I'm honored to speak with you guys about it.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, definitely a real interesting topic. Even if I have a chance, there's even things that I've looked into before where I think, of course, I'm going to go back to the eyeball, but there's even stuff with that when it comes to Christmas stuff. Even it's really weird is that the way that our cones, I think it is, I get confused now. Whichever one that gives color in the back of our eye, the way it's wired, same damn way Christmas lights are wired with all those extra things. And it's the same colors that are used on Christmas trees as well.
Right, and the lights are very important to the season. In contrast, the darkness is too, right? Because this is the darkest time of the year, and so the candles as a magical and ritual element really come into play, right? In fact, the Santa Claus syndrome idea in modernity, you'll hear people basically say the same aspects of this tale. And one of the things that they'll insist is to not tell children the truth in order to maintain the magic of the holiday. And so the Yule log, that comes from the Wiccan seasons, the 8 seasons, 2 polarized, 4 kind of seasonal look at things. So the Yule is the winter solstice, and so that's kind of from a whole ritualized understanding. Mistletoe is used, and holly and the pine tree are all used for their symbolism in relation to green. And Osiris was depicted green too for the same reason, for the regeneration and rebirth and not dying that the evergreen trees and holly and mistletoe have. And mistletoe was also used as a spell of protection rather than what we use it for now, mostly as a way to get a kiss, right? As an excuse for a holiday kiss. And caroling too is from a magical tradition, possibly, of wassailing, which is also related to trees and is kind of like blessing the trees for protection and waking them up, so to speak. So all of these things about Christmas are actually potentially, if not certainly, from magical practices of old. And in fact, Santa Claus is an attachment, not necessarily itself, the story itself, pertinent to Christmas. And Christmas developed from all kinds of other practices, most notably Saturnalia. And going back even further, this time of year was celebrated for its rebirth, ritualized process, and agricultural and astronomical and astrological symbolism all throughout it, and even boiling it down to in the ritualized sense, it has a whole initiatory process to it, even in its most base of that we survived another cycle, that we survived the year, and now the sun is returning. And so ancient Babylonian myths and Osirian and Jesus, of course, have this rebirth cycle and symbolism to them, and that often there'll be the 12 disciples in this symbology, Krishna, and so there's a huge series of widely celebrated human practices behind all this. And so that's kind of the pagan, if you will, rituals, but I think it was, maybe that's too broad of a scope because it was just so widely celebrated in early humanity. And that kind of, from that, if not parallel with that, we have Saturnalia, which we start to see there's this institutionalization of spirituality. I'm sure there's other examples, but in Saturnalia you can see it in the following manner, especially that they would flip the script. The slave would be the master, and the master would be the slave, right? Essentially, the owner and master would serve dinner and so forth, and you could insult them in jest. And there were stories where even laws were paused, right? Where things that you normally could not get away with, you could get away with at certain times in certain places. And solstice, of course, means sun pause, right? And that's the astronomical significance of these gods and the ritualized initiatory practices of rebirth and regeneration and developing anew. And on a daily cycle, one can practice this, but in the yearly cycle, this is practiced then and to this day, where we reflect on the year past or the day past, and in the morning and in the same time of year, because of this pause, we reflect on the plans for the day and or the future year. So both of these are really a common thing during the season. New Year's resolution, which harkens back to, these traditions, to ancient traditions, and of course the reminiscing on the best of 2024, if you will. And so part of the whole process is, I think, the psych out. And we think of the Saturnalia practice as seasonal, but if we look at the modern practice of the Santa Claus story, it's not just a singular annual thing. It's a process, as I see it, with the psych out that is kind of parallel to these Saturnalia psych outs. And so many different cultures have many different moral figures that provide lessons, and Santa, of course, can be that. But part of the process in the indigenous, or not the modern practices, there's not this elaborate psych out, right? And so even when you can't understand what NORAD is, you just know that they're like some really strong figures. You're seeing that these military folks are actually insisting that they're tracking Santa, right? And it's almost, for a lot of people, it might be the first time that their parents lied to them, that they realize ultimately, again, over a process of a few Christmases, not just one. And so everyone kind of knows the story enough to maintain the lie. And again, if you could bring up religion. Oh, Headless, were you going to say something?
Yeah, if I could pop in really quick, if
Please,
it's not,
please.
if it wasn't a pagan holiday, it seems like the Christmas traditions that we have today around Santa Claus and around all of the symbolism there couldn't have been designed any closer to the syncretisms that they represent. So you've got Santa Claus that represents sort of a Jupiterian Saturn figure, like the old man who's really jolly and huge, right? And that goes back to the Christmas star, where you've got a Saturn Jupiter convergence that happens every, I think, decade or so. And then you've also got the aspects of the polar north, the polar symbolism there is very, very strong. That's where he's coming from, is the polar north. And all of these different pagan aspects, including the tree, the evergreen and all this stuff, is sort of all packed into our quote unquote secular version of Christmas celebration, which definitely dominates when it comes to symbolic representations during the season. And the reindeer also, that's a very Old Norse symbol for prosperity and all the rest of this prosperity wagon that's coming to deliver all these gifts to you. And the fact that he's somehow omniscient as well indicates that he's some kind of a god, even though they don't say it. But all of these things seem to be boiled into the fact that this is the symbol for the season. And, it takes off so well because I think there is a lot of ancestral memory that goes into this thing where people can't really get away from the thinning of the veil or the changes of the cosmic season during this time of year.
Yeah, and that's very well said. And it all is very magical at a very primal, conscious or unconsciously recognized level, right? We realize there's a cosmic kind of unification in all this. And in the development of Santa, of course, it the personification of Santa came from Father Winter and Grandfather Winter in Europe, right? And then was secondarily correlated or came to the idea of Saint Nicholas being represented in that too. And Saint Nicholas was really a favored saint because he was the saint of sailors and benefactors of children. But because he was the benefactor of sailors, he traveled far and wide, right? To your point about in the north, the Siberian form of Santa may have kind of been part of the reason why we amalgamated this characteristic into Father Winter and then Santa. In Siberia, the shamans or healers would travel in the winter to check on their townsfolk, and often they had mushrooms with them, and often they were traveling on a sled of deer, and there sometimes the snow years were so great that they would travel down the smoke holes rather than the door. The door was just, you're buried, so you'd go in what would be the chimney hole, but the smoke hole more specifically. All these different archetypes from all these different places kind of come together in this example of what is an amalgamation or a mix-up of all these different traditions, and it almost makes it more significant than less, right? Just because it's not original, like I think like it's inferred, it's actually a mix, so it's almost more valuable. But then it's taken away. It's a great example of the mix that is biblical spirituality and traditions, but it's also, Christmas is also an example of how it gets split from this esoteric, wonderful consciousness practice, even just with family discussing things during the darkest and thus quietest time of year. It gets taken away into this exoteric and political kind of influence, like so many holidays of the past, right? And so many holidays today are utilized for state and government setup of consciousness rather than development of such. Um, uh, Another thing about this time of year in meditation practice, in Tai Chi practice, in magical practice, the darkness is when you can really set intentions and thus set magic for your psyche. It's when that power really comes about. All these traditions say that same thing. So that's interesting. During the darkness, you can set intentions. That's kind of what people have been doing. But the Santa Claus syndrome, I think, comes from this split of the esoteric and into the exoteric, where we actually have removed all the wonderful initiatory ritual of it and inserted a practice that affirms lies and lying. Because over these many seasons, a child, not everyone has the same response or reaction, but the typical story setup is that you've been told by everyone from your parents, from the weathermen, maybe your teachers, all know a NORAD, they all know the same story. Strangers that you might like, hey, buddy, do you know if Santa does this? Yeah, everyone knows that. They'll affirm it too. And then you're told that it's all been a lie. And not only that, but part of it is the possibly, okay, the pressure is on, the parents got the pressure, and there's other kids visiting, right? It's not just the brother and sister, not just the single child. There's cousins and other younger kids, and you're told to affirm the lie to them. And so it's the first. Sorry?
The Santa disclaimer. They're like, well, we might have kids here that still believe in Santa, so you've got to stick with the lie too. I think it really has a macrocosmic implication when you're sitting this child on the lap of this liar and they're screaming their heads off because the parents want to increase the magic of the season. So they're kind of forcing their kids into this role, and the kids don't want to be a part of the role, and all the anticipation and all of the anxiety of it just sort of builds up into this cry of get me out of here. This is too much pressure. I don't want to be in this situation. And yet, it's something that the parents kind of force on these kids in a very kind of a malicious way, I think. Not intentionally, unintentionally.
It really reveals how influenced we are when we examine this holiday, right? Because we really should be leaning towards the esoteric and the spiritual and even the moral lessons and teachings that are involved. But it's a psych out because we say one thing and do another, right? We've practiced this lie to people that, right, like you pointed out, with sitting on the lap of the person, there's an emotional power that's just like really big, even though it's hilarious to an observer, like, but to that person that's crying, it's really intense.
It's horrific. And you've got all these eyes on you, and everyone's
right. This guy, you're not sure if he's fake. If he's fake, why the hell is he fake? Get me. And everyone's looking at you, and they're kind of laughing, and you're upset. And oh man. And so each one of these kind of systemizations of an astronomical, astrological, natural, agricultural, seasonal practice that can be really used for developing our consciousness, even all these spiritual tones that are put into it, and then we've taken it away into what is totally, everyone kind of accepts that it's materialistic, right? But people, when you get into this, you might realize that it's also potentially impacting our apathy and making us apathetic, right? So there's this attachment of storyline that's kind of diluted, and now even there's another attachment to the Santa story from modernity, And it was, when I was a kid, my favorite. Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer has the same kind of attachment kind of idea, and it really has the same kind of psych out, excuse me, or magical incarnation, or magical spell casting on the psyche, because it, like, a kid is seeing this reindeer that's rejected because he's not good enough. Every kid is going through that believes in Santa, especially at that age. Everyone's saying, you're too young, you're too little, no, you can't do that. And so you immediately identify with this character, and then you realize, oh no, the reject does not become the leader. It was all a lie. It's almost, it's the magic killer over the seasonal progress. So that was essentially the spiel there, if you guys want to add on.
I'll jump in. Oh, sorry, Nick, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jim.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. So, Ethan, you said so many interesting things. One thing I thought was interesting was your framing of the story of Christmas being a magical story. But what if that's, and it is also the degradation. So I think you're right in saying both of those things. Like there's like a kind of loss of religious or spiritual value that I totally see that as well. But I think that there's also like a metaphysics of the Santa story. Like I think that there are, like
sure,
pre-recording, like the tree and the colors and like how that relates to Kabbalah, how that relates to like magical.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So I think that there is like, and maybe you could even say the story of Santa is initiatory in a way, because it's like people who it maybe that plants a seed of something, and then when they sort of they are revealed that Santa is not real or whatever, that's a revelation, and so then that's like, it's a little bit of an occult like way.
Very good point.
So I just was thinking about that when you were speaking.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think you're right. Some people respond in a way that is positive, but I think it does cause a lot of people to have the attitude of, got to get along to go along. You gotta accept the lies and just not really question it sometimes, But you're right. It is an initiatory process in itself. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I just was, because what if that is the test? It's the test to see like who goes along to get along. Like if it's like like all about control, like maybe the people who break free a little faster, or like recognize that you can cross the Rubicon, that you can sort of see beyond what is the outer density. Those people are meant to go further in the story. Those people are meant to like understand some of the like symbolic layer deeper.
Great. Yeah, completely agree. I just think that the overt, and what do they say? 85% kind of would rather die than think. 5% or 10% think they think. 5% actually think. So I think largely it has the impact of reducing our questioning, even though, again, we're told one thing but shown another. If the 85%, or 85% of the time, are thinking about what we want rather than what do you think about something, right? Which that's the question which kids get, right? And it really, even though we're told it's about giving and not getting, right? We are always asked, what do you want, right? Not what do you think, barely ever, but in this season, kids are asked, what do you want? So you're absolutely right, Jen, and that is, you are a positive individual with a positive outlook. I'm being all negative, looking at the negative results.
I got to go into another negative. What about these cubes of Saturn that we place under the tree of fertility? Right? So all these little cubes of Saturn that we've dressed up in their pretty little boxes that really, they could be anything in there, but that's where all of the treasure is stored for these kids that have been told they're going to get what they want. And for a child, it's very rare for them to get exactly what they want because everybody else has a schedule, everybody else has a thing to do, and these kids are kind of dragged along, kicking and screaming because they're not being paid attention to, they're not being affirmed, they're not being treated, as if they're in charge. But it seems like for this one day out of the year, they get to be in charge, and the one thing that they get under their tree is the thing that they've been wanting all year long, and they've been surveilled, right? The big man, he's always surveilling you. He knows when you're sleeping, when you're awake. He knows what you've been doing. And now, after all of that surveillance, it's about ready to pay off, where you get this cube of Saturn. And in a lot of ways, I do see it as this kind of ancient agricultural ritual having to do with Saturnian beliefs, right? I've got Virgil's Gorgics, sorry about that, here, where he's talking in Latin about, the changing of the seasons and the nobility of the agricultural profession, which was really rare back in the time when he wrote this, because back then all the glory lied with the soldiers. But in the very beginning of the book, he's like, how lucky are you to be a farmer instead of a soldier? Where a soldier goes out and dies, you get to farm the land, and you get to have the dignity of, seeing what you create. So in a lot of ways, you have that same kind of energy in this, where, how blessed are you that this is this time of peace. Well, at the same time, you've got all these conflicting messages that are telling you, fight or flight, all over the place, so you're not actually getting the peace, whereas everybody's just screaming at you, peace on earth, and that's not really what you're getting. But it's a very human thing to be in that situation where everybody's, demanding that tradition of peace while at the same time kind of ruining it in the process.
Yeah, great polarity there. And that's another kind of ancient aspect of the time of year, right? Where people will say, oh, the sun might not come back and we could die. Like, let's sacrifice was a big deal during this time of year for agricultural purposes, because the animals may not survive and you have to sometimes cull, but you have some food. So yeah, there was always great feasting. In fact, so much so that the only time Christmas was actually persecuted was by Christians. In England, and actually the New World too, because it was seen as kind of, I think at the essence of it was that celebrating the birth of Christ was reducing him to someone who was born on earth regularly, whereas he had a much more noble, obviously, birth. So they were looking at not celebrating his birth like a normal king, and banned it. And even in England, I believe for decades, if not longer, probably only decades, they would go to people's houses on Christmas to make sure they weren't having a big meal. So it really, there's another exoteric politicized steering aspect of what is a powerful consciousness, primal thing going on, no matter what we put into it, what we've been told it represents. There's definitely something unique and powerful going on.
Well, they weren't alone. The Christians were not alone in trying to, I guess, take the fringes and take the frilliness out of Christmas. Also, in 274 AD, when Aurelius said that the 25th of December is going to be the birth of Sol Invictus, this cult where Sol Invictus became the central focus of the Roman pantheon, he said that, this is going to be a time of humility. This is going to be a time of piety. And so you don't want to have these flashy displays and everything else like that. Well, it's from the official cult saying that, it changed very rapidly because, all of the people are not doing what they normally do all year long. This is a time when people have time and the space to show off their ostentatiousness. This is the time when the farmers come home from the fields. This is the time when you're trying to, have your family gathered together. So it was a time of, comparative ostentatiousness. So, from the ancient times where you've got humility being the central focus to the Christian times when they kind of imposed austerity, you kind of get this sort of contrast. The leaders have always been kind of trying to impose a kind of reflectiveness into Christmas that gets lost a lot of the time when people are, rushing around trying to fill up the checklist.
I wanted to jump in. What I had prepared to discuss tonight was actually Saint Nicholas as like a magic saint, like how he is sort of thought of in both like sinister Catholicism and like just maybe folk Catholicism. But actually, it goes along with what both of you are saying. I know you might be surprised to hear that, but actually, I agree that he has very Saturnian qualities. And thank you, Nick, for bringing this up. Is because, and this is why I chose this icon, because it has that, it's like a black and white check pattern. He's holding the book has a Byzantine cross. Well, as Mario said in the series, Mario from Symbolic Studies, on the series on this show, he talked about how that cross can also be understood to be a swastika or like a North Star, a North Pole sort of cross around the North Pole. So there's something really interesting with him being like a solar saint, because the book is very Binah, it's very Saturn. Like he's drawing the story of Christmas and what it is into written text, like black ink on a white page, like very black and white, right? And so that is very text understanding. So there's something like very Saturnian about him. And I think that he's also wearing purple. So if you see a lot of, but like dark purple. And also even the dark green that's on the bottom, you can see like Romick wrote how sometimes Binah will flash green. So you'd have this like lower green, not like the green of Netzach and not like a green of Hode, but you'd have it like it's more of like a deep green, like almost black. So that's also really interesting. But then I think that there is like, obviously I always think of it in more the tantric way where it's like there's the dragon planet, and the dragon's also associated with the sun. So that's really interesting because Saint Nicholas is considered to be more of a solar saint. So it's like something that Headless was saying about Sol Invictus. I personally think, and I'm not saying that Christianity is Mithraism, but I do think that maybe one of the mystery religions within Catholicism is Mithraism. But I think that Jesus serves that purpose. I'm not saying that it's like one to one, but I think that there are multiple layers, inner outer secret layers of the story, and some people are going to be more interested in the inner and secret temple material. But Saint Nicholas is really also interesting because he's offered frankincense, myrrh, and gold, but gold leaf. So when you do an incense for him, you add the gold leaf on top of it. So when you're burning, so it creates this thing, like even Hellas was talking about this with like the pine trees and like this thing. Well, the frankincense and myrrh, and he is from Myrna, Turkey. So this is where a lot of the myrrh production of that time was from. What is tree resin? Also, tree resin's also used in metallurgy. It's flux. The original flux comes from frankincense and myrrh. So there's this other idea that in flux you get to capture the potential of creation and destruction, both the things at the same time. So I just think that that's really interesting. So you offer him these three things in incense, and then sometimes people make like a scapular bag. So it's like this little leather bag that has like the Psalms, maybe Pentacles of Solomon are written inside, and you fill it with those three things like gold, frankincense, and myrrh, and you offer it, and you actually do it for 13 days. So there's like a very Chesed or Jupiter number. So like, because it's the 1 plus the 3, so, or the 4. So you have this thing where he's like bringing wealth. He's Saturnian, so you're pulling it into form. And then he also has this kind of solar element. That means that he is shining like the revelation. Maybe you could say it's like the revelation of what the real meaning of the story is. But he also has this like very kind of like folk magic element, but it's all tied in together. Because all like even in folk magic, like the numbers still make sense in a more high magic Kabbalistic way. So there's some. I just want to say there's something really interesting, and he has a lot of Saturnian like colors and iconography. So I agree with that as well. But I also think it's interesting to think of him as both Saturnian and solar at the same time.
So there is a huge crossover between Sol Invictus and Christ, and you can actually find it in the Vatican, in their Vatican basement, where only the top scholars at the Vatican can go. They have murals of Sol Invictus and Christ sort of combined in the same image. And the purpose there is because they weren't in competition back then. There was yeah, so it says, this seems to show Jesus with the attributes of Sol Invictus. Now, it's pretty obvious that they weren't in really stiff competition. So before Constantine was into Christianity, he was very, very deeply into the cult of Sol Invictus and actually put Sol Invictus on the money. And the issue of that money continued for 20 years past his conversion. There wasn't this big competition going on back then as it's sort of portrayed today between paganism and this emerging Christianity. They just sort of saw that as a different cult of the same kind of Western milieu. So you really do have a lot of influences in that Christian story of this 25th of December birthday of Sol Invictus immediately after the Saturnalia. And what's also interesting about that Turkey connection is that the slaves would wear the hat or the Phrygian cap of Turkey while they were, being freed for the time of Saturnalia. So there's a big crossover between all of this Turkish influence, especially in Rome, because the Romans believed that they were the Trojans. And they believed that after Troy fell due to the Greeks, they came over and founded Rome several hundred years later. So there is a huge crossover between Turkey and Rome. And they always sort of had that back and forth going on with the symbolism of the freed slave, the Phrygian cap, which we see on the coat of arms of the army today. You can see in the back there's a pole with a Phrygian cap on it, right on the army's insignia. So that was the ancient symbol for freedom. That's why they call it the Liberty Cap as well. And you also see it on Santa Claus, right? He's got sort of like a modified with a tassel on the end version of that Phrygian cap. So the stocking cap of Santa Claus is really similar in a lot of ways to this Phrygian cap. And it's that symbol of the season. So I think having that context really starts to open things up, and you see it really how ancient all of these different symbols really are.
And I understand it as that the Christians were like, hey, wait, they weren't like, oh, this sounds like Osiris, or this sounds Mesopotamian or Babylonian. They were like, yeah, it does. It's all in there. They're all in there. So it was more like a way that got people interested in it because it unified instead of was original.
It didn't really become a wedge issue. It didn't really become a wedge issue until the people in command had to get rid of all of the other religions. At that point, it really became a large wedge issue. And they're like, nope, all that stuff is gone now. You can forget we ever said it. We're taking your life if you say it again. So that's important to remember.
I think that there's actually an interesting discourse that happens sometimes about whether the Crusades or whether the sort of like Roman imperial expansion under the church's influence was good or bad. And I actually think looking at it in a maybe a devil's advocate way is more interesting. And I think at large scale, people had rejected Christianity, but that's sort of not Christianity, paganism. So that's really neither here nor there. But I do think that what all of you are saying is really interesting, because I do think that it's meant to be a system that people from different sort of perspectives can come in. It's very syncretic in like the highest IQ way that can be. It's telling the story. It's giving the system. It's really hard. It's very dense. It's Saturnian in many ways because it's institutional. So it's putting a lot of what did Jesus say in the temple? They're putting stumbling blocks before the people, so they can't fully understand what they see in front of them. But I think that I think there is a way to move, like ascend that system per se, and I think it has a lot to do with not just the sort of exterior sola scriptura biblical knowledge, but also like commentaries and like Kabbalah, Christian Kabbalah, but also obviously in that time would have been more like Hebrew Kabbalah or Persian Kabbalah. And so, but I think the system actually makes sense once you put it all together. It just is like, but just from the average churchgoer, you're not going to really understand what's going on. I think it's very opaque.
Yeah, and I think, please, sorry.
I was going to say that goes into the esoteric angles of all of the traditions that they were drawing on. I mean, if you take all of the symbols of Christmas and you just hold them up at face value, it makes absolutely no sense. None of this on face value makes any sense. And so when people are attending, these church services and they're trying to take the stories on at face value, it becomes very difficult. And there really does need to be a lot of commentary about this so that people can actually learn, hey, this stuff is actually very beautiful and you have to know the roots of it. But if you take it all at face value, you're going to be incredibly confused and it's going to cause a lot of problems.
Well, oh, sorry, Ethan, go ahead.
No, please.
I just wanted to say, well, this is something that I find really interesting, the schism between the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, and like how they have differing opinions on the sort of identity of the divinity of Jesus. Like, is it mixed? Is it half and half? Is it Trinitarian? Like, all this is happening. And so I think this actually has a lot more to do with like mystery religion and like Kabbalah than I think it actually has to do with like the outer story. But I disagree with you slightly, Headless, in that I think the outer story is perfectly fine for like most people. I think most people can derive enough morality, mythological content. I think most people are fine with that, and I'm fine with that. Like, people, are going to believe what they want to believe. But then I think that there's people like us who are like, oh, okay, like what's like beyond this? Let's like read this thing that might be transgressive or like taboo, and so I think that's what you're always going to have that. So, but the church, I think, really tries, or at least tried pre-Vatican II, because the church that is now is not the church that was like the church of like my grandparents or like Teresa's grandparents or like Nick's grandparents. It's like a totally different, almost like institution. So yeah, I think I think that there's an interesting sort of discussion that happens in the schism between the Eastern Orthodoxy and Catholicism, because I think it speaks to this. Like, what do you do? Like, the Greek Orthodoxy seems to have like so much right. Like, they're non-dual. They have an understanding of Kabbalah, even in their cross. I've spoken about this before. Other people have spoken about this before, because it's so obvious. I mean, it's just like, it's right in their iconography and it's all over like their stuff, like Mary Magdalene pointing at the egg. I mean, and holding the mortar and pestle. It's just something really deep there. But I just think that they're dealing with a lot more deeper theological questions that I think are very occulted to the masses. I don't think people are really understanding the nature of these like deeper theological discourses, especially in medieval times. Like, it's just the reality that the people's literacy came up through the church, like through the Bible, through the Latin Bible, but then later on into the colloquial Bibles. So I just think it's so fundamental to kind of our understanding. And so maybe in like the post-war era, like when Santa became like a thing, they just kept they kept trying to like revivify, resurrect the sort of story by adding layers. But if you sort of have good Kabbalah practice, that adding layers is never going to help you. It's always going to sort of densify your activity in the sphere. So what you want to do is you want to break the layers. So that's kind of what we're doing now. But but yeah, there's something really interesting about all of this, about this discussion.
Yeah. And I was going to say how it is how we're discussing the syncretism of this holiday and the New Testament thereof, and Santa being Saturnalian. This time of year, I think we have the time aspect that is solar, and Saturn being the god of time comes into it there too, right? And in regards to time, I think not only is this an astronomical thing going on, but the esoteric aspect of the celebration of this time of year, if you, like I like to do, is be syncretic where it hasn't been syncretized before. In especially Qigong and Tai Chi, there's a very agricultural correspondence in the development of self, your chi or your health or your mentality and so forth. So time is super important to development, and sometimes it's 40 days as referenced in the Bible repeatedly. Often enough it's referenced as 90 days, the typical grow season on earth in the agricultural sense. And Osiris, it has 28. The 4 weeks is a big representation with the Osirian kind of timing of development, if you will, or rebirth. Again, all agricultural oriented. So I just wanted to add to that kind of idea.
What you're talking about is the Trinitarian nature of these different holidays, right? So you've got the New Year, right? You've got Christmas, and then you've got something before Christmas that's sort of lacking. And before Christmas in the old days was Saturnalia, which was a long time period that you had to build up to the Christmas and then, eventually into the, the changing of the calendars. But during that time period, you had this triple type holiday. And we don't really have that today, because what comes before Christmas? Well, the 12 days of Christmas, but is that really official? Is that really codified? You've got Hanukkah, which has the idea of the 8 nights before this event where the oil comes back. So it's sort of like the returning of the solar oil, or the fire of the sun kind of idea as well. But we're kind of missing that sort of like lead up to Christmas that is sort of official. So we don't really have that anymore. And, Saturnalia was the celebration of all of this time, all of these segmentations of time, and all of these different ways of viewing that time. And instead, we kind of have, everybody get everything ready and do everything you can. And it doesn't really, doesn't pace everything, right? So the idea of Saturn as this agricultural god, it's all about pacing. It's all about doing the right thing at the right time and then getting the right result. Everybody waits till the last minute on Christmas. You've got this sort of mad rush that goes on there. It's depicted in all the movies. It's depicted online. It's everywhere. Everybody has to rush around before this event because there is no real pacing. You've got all these other responsibilities, and those other responsibilities don't ever take a back seat to the upcoming holidays.
Yeah, everyone's working to buy presents instead of celebrating the presents, right? I always found that term, that sound interesting. Presence of mind and present in time. It's very interesting.
I like that, Ethan, because in Buddhism, time is fixed. Like, he's sitting on the carnal ground. He's sitting on his throne. He's fixed in space. So there's something really interesting about that, what you just said about presence. And also about I know you take it from more the Taoist angle. I come at it from more the Buddhist angle, but sometimes a little Sino-Buddhist maybe as well, is that, Saturn in Chinese cosmology is an agricultural deity. He is the god of the yellow earth. So like especially that valley in China where the original civilization was, it would be like dry and cracked and totally barren at this time of the year. And so right pre the riverine flood, so the Yangtze River would flood over, carrying the silt, carrying all like the topsoil nutrients to the rice paddies. So something really interesting about Saturn as an agricultural deity, and not simply it's not as easy as saying he is the god of death, because in a lot of especially the Eastern culture, he is not actually. He's actually one of the life-giving sort of deities, maybe associated with the death of old age, but not. He's not like the death of. He's not just death. He has like it's a more expansive conception.
Well, in the Orphic hymn to Kronos, they call him the god of perfection and decrease. And you can assume from that it means death, but the closer you get to perfection, the closer you get to decrease, right? And so
that reminds me of Occam's razor.
Right.
That's cool.
So the closer you have perfected everything, the more chances and likelihood of achieving more decrease. It's very
beautiful.
Very much that second law of thermodynamics at work in the idea of Kronos itself. And so, you see that in time, but they also in that whole hymn, they're talking about how he's the one that cuts so that you can come back reborn, so that you can come back purified. And a lot of what the Saturnalia was about catharsis. And that's why you would have these reversals of roles, and why it was okay to scream at these other people who were upper class citizens is because that was their form of catharsis. This goes back to the ancient Greek days of having everybody in the at the play, at these massive events. They would be able to voice their concerns and yell and hurl insults at the people who were in charge, because that's how you achieve societal catharsis. They have to get it out of their system. Again, this goes back to Saturnalia ending on the 23rd, right? But leading up to that point, so that people could get the catharsis out of the way, so that they could be purified for the rebirth of Sol Invictus, their God. The rebirth of Jesus, their God. So you get the catharsis out of the way so that you can be pious for the returning of your deity. So, that purification is important for society. And what we end up doing is just yelling at each other online and never achieving any kind of ritual catharsis.
I wanted to point out two things. Is that so St. Nicholas, his feast day is on the 5th or the 6th, depending on what schedule you use. So if you do 13 days on the 5th, that would be 18, so 8 plus 1. And then on the 6th, it would be 20. 20 is a really interesting Kabbalistic number because it denotes blindness. And if you know, like Christian or Catholic, specifically Catholic magic, Saint Lucy, who is the saint of both the eyes, Nick, and of light, so she is on the 13th. So there's something really interesting with that. And if you did a novena for 9 days or 9 nights, I guess, on Saint Lucy, like it's really interesting. You would come up like right on the 22nd. So I do think that you have these like stages. I just think that North American Catholicism, North American sort of Christianity in general, has perhaps lost a lot of these like more European practices. But I think it's there. It just depends on, again, like at least my mom's grandparents were pre-Vatican II French Canadian Catholics. And so they retained like a lot of the meanings, a lot of like the way things are framed and why they appear in the order that they appear. So, but I think for a lot of people, it's not quite like that. I think for a lot of people, like they just don't know. And especially if like you're Protestant, I'm not like anti-Protestant, but I'm just saying like there is like your worldview, the worldview that is presented is already like undergone like a simplification, a sort of degradation. But I also think that there is something interesting also about Ethan and Headless mentioned something about alchemy and how this, like even his coal, there's something very interesting to me about that, because like the coal, what is coal? Coal is like created in like a synthesis of pressure and heat, but it's also like how diamond is also created. And like diamonds are the planetary gemstone of Venus. It's very Netzach. Jyotish, tantric astrology also describes like Netzach, or their approximation of it as a diamond, that golden light pours through. This is very like deeply Sefer Yetzirah as well. And so it's really interesting to me that it's like there is like a forging. I think that's what Hellas was even saying. Like it's like pushing you through the density. It's densifying. Like I want to call it karma, but I know that's not quite the right word. But it's like, yeah, I think that's a lot what Saturn does. I think that's a lot what Binah does. It's like constricting, and but it can also be very protective. It can also be very potent for occultism, because it has a lot of power behind it. It has like earth and fire right there. It's very accessible. So I just think that's why a lot of people like it. Like I wear a lot of black. I mean, I know Ellis always wears black, but yeah, I think a lot of people are attracted to like that sort of Saturnian presence, because I think it's powerful. I think it like roots you in a position of power, because it creates the boundaries around you. And I know somebody did the gematria of Jesus, like simple English gematria, in the chat. And so I just want to say that it's interesting because Psalm 74, that is considered to be a Saturnian psalm, actually, because it refers to the boundaries of summer and winter. So something that's interstitial, something that's in between, just like the Saturn as an agricultural deity. There are like 4 turnings or 3 turnings, depending on your cosmology, of the wheel. So yeah, I think something really interesting about that.
Well, I think it's important to note too that a lot of what goes into how we shape our worldview comes down to how we break up our year. And in the American context, our year, our calendar was made up by a bunch of industrialists. And so those industrialists wanted to command society with the whistle of the times in, times out sort of uh, idea of manufacturing. And so once that sort of took over, the ideas of agriculturalism took a backseat. The ideas of, these other practices sort of took a backseat. And so, I mean, you can kind of almost hear the whistle of production when you're in the mall and you're shopping and everybody else is rushing around and everybody's got to beat the clock and all the rest of this stuff too, because of the fact that it is kind of designed in a PDQ, everything has to be done pretty darn quick if you're going to get it right sort of way. And that's how our calendar is broken up. So they're not really thinking about the mental health and the longevity of the people who are experiencing this calendar. They're just trying to get on with it, because they've got to make their bottom line, and everybody else just kind of has to suffer through it. So in that regard, I think that, yeah, it is the Protestant work ethic that really shapes my perspective on these type of things, because that really did bring about the industrialists and how we break up our calendar year to this day. But I don't think it has to be that way. I think we can start our own traditions and actually, connect with the different ways of seeing the year and understand that there are better ways of doing it. And Americans always think that their way is always the best way of doing it, but I don't think that's the case.
And that's such a powerful perspective, Headless, to question one's own perspective, that we've been kind of, if you want to say trained, but tradition, same word maybe, to really adopt, and maybe not thought it through, just kind of went with it. So as soon as we start questioning Santa, next valid question that you point out, wait a second, like what else on the calendar is kind of, another interesting one is Independence Day is a widely celebrated, influential holiday throughout the world. And it's kind of like, yeah, okay, like we were good at one point and fought over the taxation, but there's a lot of hollowness to it as well. Besides just the aspect of the industrial calendar of what you just mentioned, that's great. It's just that we start questioning ourselves really is profound.
I totally agree, Ethan. I think there's something really interesting about July as well, simply because it used to be celebrated as, and this is not coming from me, this is something that I heard about in a space earlier tonight, so I'm trying to shout out Joshua for that. But he was talking about how in some churches the birth of Jesus was actually celebrated on the like in the summer solstice time, like closer to July, maybe. But some people did say it was July 4th. Was he said that? So I don't know if this is true, but we'll go with it. I think there's something really interesting with that in like the numerology. Someone's also doing like the 2 + 8, like 28, because 7 times 4 for Jesus is 28. So there's something really interesting there too. It's like two different systems of gematria. Like you're adding the numbers, the letters together, and then you're getting 28, or multiplying, excuse me, or you're adding them and you're getting 11. So yeah, there's something interesting. Like one is to make magic, but one is to like go up to see God. So like, what are you doing with
There's that. Sorry.
No. Please go, Ethan.
I was just blurting out there. I didn't even think when I said Independence Day, the 7-4. There's that 7-4 again that the gentleman has been referencing.
Yes, exactly. And so there's something really interesting about that as well. And so, I think that it all comes down to like, what are the foundational myths of things? Like, are they a myth? Are they not a myth? Do you believe in them personally? Do we believe in them collectively? Do we celebrate them? Do we practice them? And do we want to? And so I think that the one thing I disagree with you, Headless, is that I do think Americans are funny and interesting in this way, is that they actually question if they want to. And I think a lot of other countries do not do this. I think sometimes, that people place a lot more agency on some mythical people. I call it like a lot when I have to deal with like a lot of Indian Buddhists, like Buddhists from India who are not necessarily tantrics. I call them like they're the Aryan Kangs. So like they always project themselves into like the mythical past rather than be like, okay, we're here now, our tradition's here now, what do we make of it, what do we do with it, and what like stories do we believe from it. So I think of it, I guess I am a bit of a futurist, Ethan, in like a way, or a utopian a little bit maybe.
No, it's beautiful. Your perspective is beautiful, and it's just you're looking at what it ought to be, and we should all look at that. I looked more as what it is in the exoteric, not in the productive and intuitive and conscious that you are referencing. And you're absolutely right. You're right. It is a powerful time. And I was going to say, isn't the summer solstice 7/6? So that isn't it July 6th or something, right? So
You're right. It's June 21 usually.
Okay,
So
June. Excuse me.
But you have the 6 and the 3. So there's something that's also really interesting, and the 9, obviously. But I think that there's something really interesting about that. There's something like very Kabbalistic. So 621 is what's Arma's with. I can't read his name, but that's what he's saying. So I think that's true. I think that it's like a different positionality, you could even say, on the tree. Like how you would map that out is a little different. So what the holiday that you would want is one that you would draw from. I think this is what a lot of pagans, I'm not trashing pagans in any way, I'm just saying I think this is something that pagans often get wrong, is that they think that the Catholic Church is taking from them, but rather it's looking at the esoterica behind the things and positioning itself on the same trajectory or the same position on the tree. That's really what it is, because that's what magic really is, right? It's like the ritual grammar, the positionality, the colors, the numbers, the names. That's really what
it's the foundations that they're building off of. I think that's a good way of putting it, right?
I mean, I would say that the foundations are metaphysical for me. But I mean, if some people want to argue that they're semi mythological or partly contained in, like, I actually think, like a lot of what you talk about, Headless, is in the Greek mythologies, is very applicable to Christianity, because as anyone who studied like the early church, obviously it's a lot of the synthesis between Judeo Hellenic mythologies. Like that's a lot of what Christianity is, and there's nothing wrong inherently with that. It's totally fine. It's actually really interesting because it's sort of two very high IQ people coming together, putting their knowledges together, maybe their understanding and wisdom, you could even say, in a holistic way, and they're forging that, and then they're seeing what results. And so I personally don't have a problem with it. I think it's really interesting, but I also think it's like, what is the, so you could say, like, sure, you could say that is based on some, like, Easter is based on Ostara. We know that that's not really true. We know it's more based on a Passover, if anything. Christmas, I do think the Saturnalia thing, I think that Headless has talked so much about this. I actually become a little more Saturnian pilled in the sense that, yeah, I recognize there probably is something about Saturnalia and Christmas and choosing this specific dating, and how, like, our Julian calendar, like solar and Saturn at the same time, it's always like the two balancing out. Or maybe you could say it's Saturn keeping time, so because we use a solar calendar, especially in the Catholic Church, whereas
Well,
like Judaism uses the lunar calendar.
I think it's that Christmas star that really, really does the heavy lifting on the idea of Saturnalia, and as well the idea of Santa Claus, because it's the conjunction of both Saturn and Jupiter in a perfect circle. Like, we're talking, this Christmas star happens like once every 10 years or so. I got to look it up to find out the exact date, but this Christmas star is the conjunction of the old king in the pagan tradition and the new king coming together to light up the heavens at the time of year when it is the darkest, right? So it's almost like this is the rebirth of the sun, is when these two father figures get together, and then you've got this third figure of the son being reborn after going to sleep for 3 days, and so it's a very powerful thing that I think a lot of people have the wrong ideas about Saturn, and they think that it's not a gift to live in this time where you do have perfection and decrease all the time. But if you look at that, the presence as a present, the idea there is that you have to have time so that you can have perspective. And without that perspective, it would be impossible for people not to turn into just raging narcissists, and that the idea of being able to put yourself in the back seat and take a look at your life and see exactly who you are and what you've become and all the rest of this stuff, that is a function of time. That is priceless. Without that, we would have no perspectives on ourselves, and we would have no perspectives on everything else either. So I think it's very important what Saturn does, but people just don't look at humility as being a valuable thing anymore, and I think that goes into
simplicity.
Right. And I think that goes into a lot of the materialism too that's happening at the same time. It's all simultaneous.
Exactly leads to that. Yeah.
I just wanted to add, Headless, that you were talking about the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction. So if you look at it like the Goddess Tantra stuff that I usually talk about when Nick invites me on, is so Binah, I related to Kali, Jupiter, Chesed would be related to Green Tara. I'm sure Ethan's also familiar with like Green Tara. She's the goddess of mercy, so it makes perfect sense why she would be there. And she is blue-green but there's an interesting thing to her quality of blue-green, is that blue-green is like the air quality. So it's like actually invisible. It's actually clear. It's actually like the ocean or the water, which both of you and like Ethan and Headless both have done many episodes on the show about. So I think that there's something really interesting in like the coming together of the earth and the waters. And like I did a episode on this, is like, what is the prime mover versus the first cause? Because the prime mover in Tantra is considered time, but it's not time as in the fixed time on the carnal ground or the king of the carnal ground sitting in his throne. It's actually Kali standing on his corpse. So she is the destruction of time, but only through him can she exist. So she's making the wheel turn in a one way of thinking and taking us completely out of form, completely out of the physicality. But in order to come into experience and into consciousness, something that Headless brought up, we must like receive the vital fluids at Hesed or from Green Tara. And she's always depicted in, especially in Indian iconography, as breastfeeding Shiva. So she it's like Shiva's directly receiving like the waters of life through her. So it's like saying like, yeah, like Saturn can take us out, but to come back in, we need Jupiter, we need Hesed, we need like green tar, we need to come back into form. But it's not total form. There's something else. There are another two processes you could say, but consciousness, definitely that is like the water, right? So it's like the balance between those things. And then you could also say that the tree is imbalanced when Saturn and Jupiter are in like are in like this synthesis, because those aren't opposing Sephira. So just a thought, just something interesting, like just something to think about.
Well, I found a period that the Christmas star happens, and it's every 20 years. And the last conjunction into the Christmas star, where Saturn and Jupiter cross over each other, was in 2020. So for some reason, we are on a perfect trajectory every 20 years. The next one's going to be on 2040 for another Christmas star. So that's, I think that's kind of significant when it comes to the calculation of these calendars, is that every 20 years, smack dab on the 20-year mark, you have another Christmas star conjunction. So I think it's very, very significant, and it doesn't get all the attention that it needs to. If you look at the idea of the Christmas star and the outbreaks or the viruses, you've got in 1918 the Spanish flu, which carried on over into the 1920 region, and you've got COVID in the 2020s. So you've got this idea of like every 100 years, you've got this Christmas star conjunction that has a virus attached to it. 1820s, you had a major outbreak as well. 1720s, you had yellow fever outbreak. So all of these things sort of match up with these major astrological cycles. And, again, if we're not paying attention to the calendar, what are we really learning from all this stuff? What is the underlying message? What's the symbolism there actually mean?
It's very interesting.
Oh, sorry, Ethan, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that there's just so many esoteric lessons in all this. I'm just digesting. Sorry.
No, that's okay. So one thing I wanted to say is about the first cause, or the first prime mover versus first cause. So if Kali is the prime mover, she is considered to be 1 in the Mahavijja system. Tara is considered 2, but Tara in Buddhism is considered to be the first cause, because consciousness is the first cause of things, of how things come into, I don't know, reality, I guess. So I just wanted to say that because I said it a little incomplete before. But also, with the North Star, well, the North Star is the wheel of time. Like that's what the North Star really is, at least in Tantra, that's what it means. So it's like how these other forces, you could say Saturn and Jupiter, move around, or the sort of fixed zodiacs, because the goddesses are clearly way above both the planets and the stars, but you could say that they're more related to the stars. So they're like the kind of fixed zodiac forces around the planets or behind the planets, but they move in line. But what moves is the planets. So the stars stay fixed, but the planets move around them. So I think that this is interesting. It's very Hyperborean. Hellas, I'm also a big fan of this line of thinking, to be honest. So yeah, perfectly up my alley.
It strikes me too that generational measurement of 20 years, right? That's basically a generation. And there's another, I think it's 28 years that it takes for Jupiter to make a full revolution. And they say, when, is it Saturn?
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah.
And there's an astrological kind of reference to one has reached adulthood when you've experienced a full turning of that 28-year cycle, which is similar to the 20 anyway, and similar to the lesson that you were putting forth with the 20.
It's like 7 years after the Christmas star is your Saturn return, if you're born right there on the 00 date. So I think there's something really powerful in that. And, again, we're talking about the measurement of time along these courses. why don't we have, major feast days that are outside of just the yearly cycle? Like every 5 years we have this thing that comes around every,
Right.
because these things happen. And it used to be that when you would have these kind of conjunctions and stuff, society would actually pay more attention to these things.
To be extra. Yeah.
Right. Extra of, just the yearly cycle. And I think
But now,
maybe
but to your point, we're now into the industrialized society that demands our time more than it wants us to pay attention to the calendar. Because then we wouldn't have like specific dates. It would be, it's usually around this one date, so they simplified it, right? So
Well,
it's to your point, our calendar system, it just is institutionalized.
even on the industrial scale, it would kind of make sense because you have 5-year plans that you're supposed to lay out for your businesses, and you're supposed to have all these other things. But if you had some more of a extra yearly cyclical event, you could actually plan these major announcements having to do with your business going to the next level or whatever, based around cycles that are more realistic for that type of growth to happen. So I think on an industrial scale, if they were actually thinking about it more, they could see the benefits of having these, big events that only come around once every couple of years. And also it would, that it builds that anticipation. It gives people something to look forward to more than just, once a year.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah. I mean,
I think it's interesting. Oh, sorry.
well, I was going to say, we think of ourselves as so advanced, but the Greeks were able to build the Parthenon, one of the most visually perfect buildings in the world, with most days of their calendar being feast days, right? So, what are we doing to ourselves where we can't get the same kind of production and still have all of this time with our family and stuff?
I think it's definitely something you might enjoy too.
Right. How much of
And
our
it
time?
goes back to that question, I think, what do you want rather than what are you doing? What are you thinking about? What's going on? All these other questions. Instead, or what do you want? We bring it to the real base.
Well, I see a real connection between what you get under that tree and what you want to be when you grow up. Because I think those are the two questions that these kids get asked most often is, what do you want for Christmas? And what are you going to be when you grow up? And I think those two have sort of a psychological connection in there. So it really does make sense why these Saturnian cubes are under the tree of fertility, because that's, what you get for Christmas is supposed to build into what you want to be when you grow up. And so these things are very, very much linked. And we see the sort of breakdown of that whole system now because we don't really have an industrialized society anymore. Like, what exactly are we doing here? And what kind of jobs are we leaving to the future generations? And are we even planning for them to have jobs anymore? Is there any plan in place at all? And I think somebody's doing the planning, but we don't know who that is. And the plan is kind of opaque and kind of, it's causing a lot of anxiety. It's causing a lot of people to just sort of get fed up with the system we have. And we're seeing the breakdown because of that.
I do think this is interesting, Helis, about like the point of like the loss of like a Saturnian or maybe paternal influence in society. But there's also an interesting idea that perhaps it's what is required, because the fullest expression of time, like Saturnian time, because there's actually two, at least in Kabbalah, well, there's multiple kinds of time, but I would say Saturnian time is best expressed through the moon, so through a lunar calendar. So maybe the loss of that, but I'm not saying the solar calendar is in itself bad either. I just think it's like it's limited in some degrees. So, but then the solar calendar sort of is more of a Jupiterian expression, you could say. So it's expansive, progressive, moving forth through time in a specific way, specific direction. It's all going to move, but we're always moving forward. We're never stopping. So that is definitely more of the time that we've experienced, I think, lately. But I agree that we need to sort of anchor ourselves, but maybe the anchor isn't synthesis. I think that's an interesting idea.
Well, in Greek, what they had was chronos, which was the objective measurement of time, like sands through an hourglass. And then they had kairos, the qualitative or lived time, personified as a young man. Kairos was the time of opportunities, moments, and events. Circular, nonlinear, it refers to the right moment, the right opportunity, or the perfect moment. So this kairos angle is sort of lost when you don't have, this perspective of maybe there is a perfect time to do this. And maybe there is. And again, this goes back to Virgil and his Gorgics, because what he's trying to do here is get people into the idea of qualitative time, the best time to plant, the best time to do this, the best time to do that. And, if we lose kairos in our society as a means of sort of showing people that this qualitative angle of time is important, depression just spikes. Everybody's mental health goes down, because then everything becomes sort of insignificant. It's just the standard march of everything going in, mechanical time.
And we're taught, to your point, we're taught in school the timeline, right? It's something that's in most every middle school class is an actual timeline. The Australians, the indigenous people there, and several other places in the world talk about time as a spiral and a circle, like you mentioned with kairos, which is, I think, something that it goes to the same kind of parallel idea of there being the exoteric and the esoteric, where we've really lost the kairos and we've lost the esoteric. And we're on that industrialized timeline of work week, and that's pretty much, you don't have much energy for much all else when it's so compressed like that.
Well, if you think about the 1980s and the kairos of the 1980s, you see that back then it was all about opportunity and seizing the opportunity. And what we've lost from that sort of American mentality of now's the time to go get it, go out there and make something of yourself and feel that victory and everything else, is it's brought us back into this chronos, march of mechanical time. And in terms of the American pantheon, if we don't get back to a sense of kairos, we lose a major part of Americanism that was vital to our, not just survival, but our excellence, I think. And so there was a sense of that kairos, and, maybe looking back, it's a little bit more rosy colored glasses than it should have been. But I feel like we've lost the paideia, or the joy of learning about this stuff. And so getting into the idea of kairos and paideia, and understanding that the most potent form of learning you can do is with a sense of joy, then you could see where our American school systems have really gone wrong, is because they teach these kids shame in things that their great grandparents did. And if you're teaching from a place of shame, these kids aren't going to learn anything. You have to have some sort of joy to anchor it in, or else they don't want to even think about it. It becomes traumatic, And if we make Christmas traumatic too, if we take away the kairos from Christmas, we're totally fucked. I mean, then there's nothing you can do. Christmas is always outside of the system. It's never on the inside of this institutionalization. You see the people in the institution celebrate it, but you're not celebrating with them. You're celebrating with your family. You're outside of their institutions for Christmas. You're not supposed to be ingrained in all of that other stuff. It goes a lot back to that worship of Sol Invictus, where you have to come at it with a sense of humility and piety, because this is a time for family. It's a time for gatherings. So, the idea that we're losing all of this kairos is really disturbing to me. And I think we need to get back to it, Spread kairos, people. Spread it.
Well, it's interesting, this idea that you raised a couple times, Hudlis, about piety and humility, because those are ways to rise through to Tippereth. Like, that's how to achieve Tipperitic consciousness. So that also obviously goes along a lot with Sol Invictus, but it also goes along with like Jesus, the Christ consciousness. I know I'm not a huge fan of that, but I know some people like it, so we'll just go with it. But yeah, definitely. And even Krishna consciousness, actually, interestingly, is very Saturnian. People often think like Krishna, Christ, those must be the same. Nick's talked a lot about this, about like Christ's position on the tree. I've talked about this with Nick and my own show about like what would Christ position on the tree, and there's definitely forms and like representation, but I wouldn't say that Jesus is in particularly Saturnian. He's actually much more related to Hesed or sometimes Gevurah, and also obviously because he obviously has the gilded heart, which is like the perfect kind of the alchemical vessel. And so to bring it back to like the point about alchemy that you both made, which is good because that's really what it is. It's like even the coal, it's like the Negrito, and from the Santa who's wearing the albedo, the red, he has the white fur, right? It's like that's the whatever it is, the albedo, and then the gold. He's got the gold buckle, so everybody kind of recognizes it. So it's the citronitis process. So it's interesting that you could count like all
He's
those
even got the
things.
coal for black.
Yeah, exactly.
Not
And
just
his
that, but
boots.
the coal is the ultimate symbol for industrialization, right? I mean, the coal is what you want to avoid. You don't want to be at work all the time. You don't want to be digging for coal during Christmas. You don't want that to show up. You want something special. You want something outside of work, outside of this institution. And I think that's why they brought in the coal in the symbols for Christmas, is because that represents the work that you're trying to get away from on the holiday, and that's, let's face it, there was a lot of child labor going on, and maybe the little kids getting coal it's like, well, now you're doomed to living a life digging out coal from these veins of earth because you were a bad little boy. So your punishment is to go work in the mines.
That's deep, Headless, and it also is like you're not going to have time to work on yourself, which is also that whole initiatory backdrop of the seasons and so forth, right? If you're stuck working on coal, you're never going to work on your consciousness. That is a curse.
The piety and the humility go a long way there, because I think if you're not pious and you're not humble during the year, then what you're going to end up doing is focused on, ambition and pride and all the things that are condemned by all these major religions, because you're not being humble. You're not, taking time to have perspective. You're not appreciating the kairos with your family. You're not appreciating the kairos outside of the systems that, basically we use as life support. So if you can't get outside of that kind of base level Maslow type idea there, then you're going to be stuck in it. You're going to be stuck digging for coal all the time. In a very broad perspective, I think.
It's very, very well said.
Awesome. I know one thing I did want to mention. I did want to toss it out there. It was something that I came across recently that I just thought was weird. And it's because I was like looking into, I guess, animals just in general that happen to have special things about their eyes. And I looked up animals that see in UV. And, most of them were all type of animals that are actually using occult symbolism, but reindeers do actually see ultraviolet light, which is why on the logo I used a thermal cam image of reindeer for it. But I do, I don't know. Again, going back to eyeball stuff, I just found that interesting. Like even with the pine cones and stuff. I mean, that's a huge symbol for the pineal gland.
Well, you use the falling snow in the beginning intro, and then you reverse the falling snow, and then it was going up. I always thought it was funny how dense falling snow makes everything feel.
Yeah.
It's a lot heavier.
Very heavy.
Right. And so by reversing it at
Saturn's
the end,
heavy. It's supposed to be.
By reversing it at the end, you kind of feel that lightness, or like when you're in a car and you've got all the snow coming at your face, it sort of feels like you're going, incredibly fast. Like I always liken it to the feeling that you get in the movie Star Wars when they're going into hyperdrive. That's when the snow is coming at you full blown. But in some ways, that sort of acceleration consciousness is what's happening right now. It's not just the acceleration of the body, it's the acceleration of the mind as everything becomes lighter and more hollow during this sort of time of darkness. And like you were saying earlier, Nick, this time right now during the winter months is the easiest time you have to cross over the abyss, right?
Yes.
When you try and do it, it's just like that. So there has to be some kind of reflection and recognition of that fact, or else you blink and it's gone. This is a very important time for developing consciousness.
A lot of it does even remind me, silly as it sounds, like the whole, going back to the eye, the pupil, the white part of the eye, making it to the pupil. You're going into the darkness. You're gonna have the shades of white. The pupil screws closed. It's just a lot of weird. To me, I believe it or not, I do think Christmas does. Among other things, I do think it even does tell like a tale of alchemy within the eyes. As crazy as that may sound. The whole death and rebirth that comes behind magic. The resurrection, part of like dying and then being reborn into spirit. I think it covers all that as well.
Absolutely.
Well said.
Thank you.
I think it's really interesting, Nick, that you brought up the thing about the reindeers seeing an ultraviolet light. I think that is something that I've been thinking about, but I think that it obviously has a meaning. It was not a random. I don't think that's random that they chose reindeer specifically. Like, yes, of course, like Headless and I, we like the Hyperborean stuff, so like, yeah, that's cool to us. But I think that there's also like a more metaphysical, less parahistorical implication. I think that there is like maybe exactly what you're talking about. Like this is an idea in Siberian shamanism, like the flight of the reindeer. Like, why is that like this idea of like taking entheogen and then you can fly like the reindeer do? Or maybe it's about seeing what the reindeer do by feeling like you're flying, because ultraviolet is often like purple or sometimes a little bit blue or a little bit pink, but in the more neon tones, right? It's a spectral light. So, yeah, there's something really deep there, I think.
Yeah, I mean, like we even said before, I mean, not to bring it back up again, but even the stuff in the back of your eyes, the way that I get confused, the cones or rods, looks like just like the same way, the Christmas lights are done. I mean, you were even saying before too about like it is spiraling or whatever. I mean, that you're doing that down the Christmas tree with the gold or silver garland. I mean, to me, I just think there's a lot of symbolism and all that shit.
It makes me think of. Go ahead, Headless.
There's very unignorable geometric implications from that pine tree, because it is very much in that kind of a spiral shape. And that spiral shape, either moving up or moving down, really does evoke a lot of primal images about the nature of reality when it comes to things like, tree geometry and talking about the golden ratio, spiraling in versus spiraling out. Like, these things have a lot to do with life and how we use energy, So the spiraling out would be energy dissipating out into the universe. That would be the heat. And then the spiraling in would be this other force that we don't really necessarily recognize too often in our society, which would be like that 0 point energy. And having that 0 point energy sort of recognized as a spiraling inward, and having that inner strength that sort of conquers anything else that could be thrown at you from that, heat explosive perspective, that materialism, is something we're kind of lacking. And we're given all the signs for it. We're given all the symbols for it. But again, it doesn't really fit too well into our industrialized society as this major important thing. We have to stay on the clock. We can't think about the Kairos, but the Kairos is definitely the jump off point. And again, you wouldn't have alchemy without Kairos, because all of the materials are supposedly completely documented. We know all the things that all of these materials can do. But if you know the Kairos and the exact right time to switch from fire to ice, then you can change the very essence of these materials that you're working with from an alchemical point of view. So all of this stuff comes down to Kairos and intuition and how to connect with the body and how to connect the mind to the universe. And these things are not really talked about in a very materialistic way, because they can't be talked about in a very materialistic way. They have to be connected to through intuition, through emotional states. They have to be experienced for them to have any real meaning. So I think, we're onto something here with all of the symbolisms. We just have to internalize it and actually start to transform it into something that is powerful and systematized for ourselves.
Beautiful. I was thinking about to build on what both you, Jen and Headless, just said about and to the reindeer visual capabilities. It reminds me of conceptualizing the chakra system. For one, isn't it funny how a lot of people in the West want to associate the chakras with physical things? As not necessarily in regards to organs or body glands, but as an actual chakra thing. No, it's not. It's a way of conceptualizing, and one way to understand the chakra system is a layering system of how we might frame our viewpoint. And to what you said about green Tara, and it actually being like the air in clarity, that's kind of what we're pursuing in considering the chakra system as levels of comprehension and understanding. We don't want to be stuck in the chakra, in the red or any of them. We don't want to be stuck, so to speak. So that idea of pursuing clarity and it being in line with Green Tara's motivation for healing just strikes me for all the colors and the clarity.
I'm glad you said that, Ethan, because that was one of the most profound, real, like, I was probably listening to a Rejects episode. Nick was probably talking about Hesed, like how it feels like, or some quality of it, and I was like, yeah, I know what he's talking about. I know exactly what he's talking about. I was like, I've actually been there before, and I just felt like that. Then I realized, like, but obviously I had framed it in my own way, my own like worldview, like through Buddhism. So I was like, oh yeah, that's Green Tara. That makes complete sense. Like I saw all the things that would be necessary for her to arise, right? So you could say it's something like that. Like there's something so it's like very profound. It's like what we call like that's where the diamond thunder is, but you don't want to, even though we would say it's like that could be said to be Hesed or said to be Green Tara. Green Tara is special because she's a star that explodes. She's like the self combusting star. So even though we like that's where like the you could say the polarities like manifest in lightning, you also are like expanding it into the air, exactly like how you said, Ethan. So you're like always letting it go. You're creating, letting it go, creating, letting it go. So it's like very alchemical, very Tesla, you could say.
Beautiful.
Very well said. All right. Look, we got TJ jumping in now. I will have him cover some stuff. I know it's late already. If any of you guys got to bounce in the middle of this or before we started, that's fine. But I will add TJ in.
Well, I'll say goodnight now. But hey, TJ, great to see you. Thank you, Ethan. Thank you, Headless, and thank you again, Nick. Merry Christmas to all of you, or Mithramos, as we were saying on Twitter. So, yeah. So have a good one, and thanks, guys.
Merry Christmas.
Peace, Jen.
What is up, TJ?
What's up?
Oh, man.
It's very like suiting why I was like delayed. It's like why I always poo-poo on Saturn a bit. It's just like the Saturn people, and they're like, oh, this guy wants to go expose Saturn. We got to slow him down as much as possible. And it's like, I don't know, spending time with the family. So it's like the normies equals 93 in gematria. So normies Saturn. It's just like, it's like the puppet master just trolling me. But I did listen to like a lot of it, or like I was about to join and then it just kept getting delayed or whatever. But here I am.
It's the right Kairos.
Yeah, right on Kairos.
So we've been talking a lot about 74. Do you have any materials on 74 that you would pop to if you think about it real quick?
Well, yeah, I saw that earlier because it's like Jesus equals 74, gematria equals 74. One thing you could look at is 7 and 4. Those are the numbers of the north and south node. And then also those 7, it would be Neptune, 4 would be Uranus, both those planets beyond the limits of Saturn. So that's like very much of note with the number 74.
Oh, back to the 74. Yeah, we were on 74 a lot, and there's some guy in the chat was going on that a lot.
And then the one
I-
thing that's like, or just Lucifer equals 74. So that's like, oh, Jesus, Lucifer, Venus,
Hmm.
what's going on, right? So
Well, I had some information on Lucifer if you guys want to hear it. So the idea in the book, in the Bible, is that Lucifer is the son of the morning star. And if you know your astronomy and you know your planet Venus, you know that during 1/3 of the year, Venus is right in front of the sun as it's rising, right? And during another third of the year, Venus is at the sunset. So it makes this sort of loop on either side, almost in the shape of horns, right? And so you've always got this idea of this horned god being associated with the son of the morning, and also Jesus. They also call Jesus the son of the morning. And so you've got this idea of this Venusian kind of energy being both beneficial and the destroyer of mankind. And also, during the sunset, which they don't seem to talk about Venus and the sunset too often, you've got this planet that is at the dying of the light, So in these two contexts, Venus takes on a very different idea in either one. And what I found is that Venus has a lot to do with this Artemis idea, where you've got I guess, quarter moon. You've got the big crescent moon, right? And it's almost like a bow and arrow in the morning with Venus right at the tip of the arrow, right? So if you think of the moon as the bow and Venus as the tip of the arrow, you can kind of see it right there. And it all points towards the sun. And that happens once or twice every year, is you get that crescent moon, Venus, and the sun all in a perfect straight line. And so to me, the idea there is that there is this kind of looming impending destruction that is associated with Venus, as if this archer has his bow drawn back and he's about ready to let go of this arrow. But I'm not sure what it means yet. Oh, it means that the cat is jumping on the screen.
All right, TJ, here you go. Here's your slides, right?
yeah. Well, one thing with that Venus too is there's just a couple memes to start it off, and then a bit of gematria. There's not a whole heck of a lot, but with the with the Venus, it's it rules Taurus and Libra. So Taurus being the springtime, the morning of the year, and Libra being the fall, the sunset of the year, like summer's end kind of thing. So there's like also a connection in there with it. Yeah, present is a cube. Present also is an anagram for serpent. So the cube, the cross is all in there. I don't know if you guys like vibe on the Christmas tree and the chakras. I think you guys were kind of talking about that a bit. I'm not sure. Because it's like the pine, the spine, pineal gland looks like a pine cone, lights it up. And I don't know about this. Like, I just included that. I'm not like, this is how it is. But like, is the Christmas tree the tree of life? But
certainly
then,
is the squirrels.
Go ahead.
I was just saying, it certainly is the squirrels.
I was going to say too that pillars are symbolic of tree and spine in both, right? And so every time, even the Christmas tree, it is symbolic of man in the esoteric, in the chakra kind of sense.
Because what we have here is like my cosmic egg diagram, essentially, with the equinoxes and the solstice. And if you were to trace the sun around the wheel, you would create this egg shape because the sun is further away in the summer and closer in the winter. And that's why I refer to it as Christ Mass, because we all know Christmas carries the weight. It's like it can around this time. Like it's just a heavy time. And I know you guys kind of covered that earlier with like the Capricorn and the Saturn and everything. So yeah, that's just it. Like I refer to it as the Christ Mass. The Christ is us going around the wheel, looping around the wheel. So when the weight is the heaviest is in Capricorn season. Like, and that's when the sun is closest to the earth, which is just very interesting. And that's like what Christmas is kind of representing as well. And with it, Christmas is the first day after the 3 days of solstice. So that it's like a celebration. It should be this like astrological celebration of us beginning to like move on past the solstice, and it just like connects with that because it's always the 25th. The solstice will always be the 21st.
Here we go.
I found it. Oh, go ahead.
Well, you got the Orphic egg idea, right? The cosmic egg. What would the snake be that's wrapped around that cosmic egg right there?
I know, right? Well, like with like the serpent, like it's just like it's the limits of Saturn. I actually like feel like I had this epiphany, but like a couple of days ago, where I was like, oh, maybe that's the snake, but I don't remember it.
See, you know what's interesting is like I do think that the snake has something to do with the size of your pupil going back and forth, and if that's the limits of Saturn, that would be the black part of your eye still, either the growing or the going down.
Well, the Greeks had 7 coils going around the egg, and so that was associated with the 7 planets. So the 7 planets basically impregnate this egg, and then what comes out of it is considered to be everything, right? And that would be phanes, which means light. So light is the result of the serpent impregnating this egg and then coming forth with out of Urania, which would be the female version of the sky, which would be the first prime before everything else. And she was upset because she didn't have anything to put her feet on. And so this serpent came along and wrapped around the egg that she just laid, and then all of the universe came out of that. So kind of bizarre, but it kind of fits, you know?
So the next one.
Yeah. I realized that Elon and Noel match, and then I was looking into it a bit more, and then it's x.com, like Xmas, and then x.com matches 55, which matches Santa and Satan. So it's like, what does Elon have to do with it? And then today he posted like his like Christmas thing on Twitter was like DMT elves or something with like Christmas.
Oh, I think I saw he had. I think they were little aliens, weren't they? Little grays.
Alien elves. There was something about elves, or it's like,
Yeah.
the aliens are the elves.
Right, that was it. Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, Santa and Satan are an anagram. Well, guess what? They also match with anagram in gematria, and they match with December, Iris, Wicked, all these matches here, and it's 5-5 because it's say 10. 5 plus 5 equals 10. 55 is the 10th Fibonacci number in the Fibonacci sequence. It's the 10th triangular number, meaning 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 all the way to 10 equals 55. It's very interesting that it is that and all those things. So it is like the say 10. And whenever I see the 55, yes, it can be a good thing, but at the same time, it's also, it is that Satan kind of thing going on there. You probably just keep moving.
Scams of the anus.
I forget the name right now, but it's on the tip of my tongue. But in Northern Europe, the goat kind of evil-looking guys that go along with Saint Nicholas, they march and do parades. It starts with an M, maybe, but they come from Odin and him traveling on the goats, traveling with 2 goats, and the term, I forget their name right now, I apologize, but it means claws, like claws of an animal, and not Santa Claus, but that all kind of comes together in that.
And like the contract of a clause, like it's Satan's clause. Be good in the eyes of Satan, not the eyes of God or anything. But if you're good in the eyes of Satan, you'll get rewarded with those material rewards kind of thing, right? It's just,
Well, the Wild Hunt of Odin takes place from December 21 to December 22nd, and it represents these ghostly hunters that come from afar, and they're doing this hunt in real time with, all of this astrological stuff happening at the same time. So December 21st and 22nd, that's when the sun is at its lowest. That's when these ghostly figures come across the veil and go hunting, and you basically, if you participate, you have a opportunity to advance in life. But if you basically become one of the hunted, you have a possibility of dying during this time when the sun is at its lowest.
And it is
Sorry.
kind of like symbolic, like with the sun resetting, the sun going on, like on my egg chart, where it's like Christmas marks the sun going back up, the day is getting longer and all that. It is very much this death and rebirth that is happening. And it's like this hidden, of course, it's a hidden element in people celebrating Christmas or whatever.
The figure that I was thinking of is Krampus, and that means claws.
Yeah.
That's
Oh, okay. So here we have Santa Claus equals 111, which is a very big number because it is important in the magic square of the sun, having 6 rows of 111 that add up to 666. So anything 111 in ordinal or English ordinal will show up in Sumerian at 666. It's also interesting that Santa Claus is at 369. And then those matches that are there with that and everything just kind of, this slide just kind of really all connects. A lot of the like pandemic stuff has to do with the 111 and the 666. Oh, I have the word there. I thought I usually block out the vacation word there, but as you can see, mandatory and vacation nasal swabs. Like it's it's Chronos, the Rona, the Corona, that whole kind of thing.
Well, did you hear what we were talking about? The Christmas star, it comes every 20 years, and that's usually associated with an epidemic. So you've got 1980 Spanish flu, you've got the corona, the yellow fever outbreak. All of that stuff really has to do with the emergence of the Christmas star at the very first cycle of the century, right? So the first Christmas star of the century is usually associated with some sort of epidemic.
So yeah, here's just more stuff that just kind of adds to the Christmas theme. Through the gematria, I also found it to be quite lustful, which like even maybe that's the ho and ho ho ho. I don't know, but there is very much, and like all these weird songs like Santa Baby, and it's like to make Santa sexy Christmas kind of thing. It's a very lustful root chakra kind of vibe. On the right, December 21st, the winter solstice, is the 356th day of the year in a leap year, that is. So it would be 355 on non-leap years. But nonetheless, 356, Christmas equals 356 in primes. That's very interesting. And it matches with like Labyrinth. Like even Second Coming kind of fits with if it's supposed to be like the rebirth and that whole kind of thing. And then I just had one more. No, it's the same one. No, I think there's just one more.
Oh, there's one more in there?
Yeah. No, just the Mariah Carey one is the last one.
Gotcha.
So Satan equals, the 330. All I Want for Christmas Is You equals 330. And her birthday is 93 days after Christmas. So the most popular, most annoying song shows up with the Satan and the Saturn. So that's like why they made that like had to be the annoying song, all that kind of thing.
Well, think about it. It's like a recruitment song, all I want for Christmas is your soul,
Yeah, pretty much. Awesome. Thank you, TJ. Was there anything else that you wanted to add, like, verbally besides slides that, stuff about this topic?
No, I think it's just like it's the Saturn. It's the Saturn holiday that has deception over it. Like, and it's everything you guys probably have been talking about for the past 2 hours or whatever. I'm sure it's all the same kind of thing. Just a little gematria validation.
I wanted to add something pretty funny or interesting. Gene Autry, he is the writer and I think performer of some of these very mall Christmas songs, and he's also said to be a very high level Freemason. So to the songs and stuff, it's just an interesting little tidbit.
Thank you. Headless, did you want to add anything? Or maybe we'll wrap it up, I guess.
Yeah, I just want to say that, this is the time of year of extreme opposites, right? Coming together. We have the family and the nurturing and also extreme materialism. And it seems like all of the symbols are kind of geared towards those extreme opposites, sort of existing in the same space. And yet, people see what they want to see in it. And I think that has a lot to do with the deceptive angle, is that really you get out what you put in. So I think there's a lot more to Christmas than people want to think about consciously. And in a lot of ways, that's a good thing, because if you're overthinking this too much, it becomes oppressive and overbearing. But at the same time, if you're not thinking about it too much and you actually find a good rhythm, a good pace, a good kairos, you're going to find that it's a very joyful season. But I think, having that eye on kairos, or the positive angle, the quantitative or qualitative use of time, is definitely the most important time of the season, is to have that qualitative time where you're taking control of how you view the world.
Very well said. Thank you very much, Headless. Thank you all for coming on today. I really appreciate you guys making the time on Christmas. Thank you, everybody who jumped in the chat. Thank you for all the rejects in the chat adding. There was a lot of great stuff in there. I really appreciate it. And yeah, that's it. That's the end of another Occult Rejects. And again, thank you, everybody, for joining us on Christmas. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.